Cecilia.
All right, we're then ready to go. So thank you all for joining this last Ask an Expert webinar of this year. So we've had 14 so far, and we'll continue them in the new year. So the last one will kick off with a great subject, which is achieving Agile Project Management through digital transformation that Mark Soyster is going to take us through. A few pieces of handkeeping before we start. So we'd love for this to be an engaging session. So please participate. Raise your hand if you have any questions. There is a tool that you can use, which is the hand feature that you can see on the screen. If you verbally want to ask a question, and then we'll call your name when we're ready for it. Or also if you want to use the chat function, which is that box you can see on the screen, if you want to type in any questions, and we'll keep an eye on it and read it out for you. Can you also please make sure that you're on mute when you're not asking any questions? And I think we're all set to go. Over to you, Mark.
Ready to rumble. Thank you so much, Cecilia. Good afternoon to wherever you are in Australia and across the world. Thank you very much for taking your valuable time and last hour out of your day. Now, my name is Mark Soyster. I'm the Executive Director of Sensei Project Solutions, and I have the pleasure of walking you through the digital transformation and how to utilize Agile more on an organizational level today. In addition to that, we are trialing a brand new feature that Microsoft Teams has introduced, which allows us to run some polls. Now, I just want to try the first one. We tried it before, so this is really a Sensei World first poll in Teams. Let's see whether all of that works. I'm going to launch the first one, and you should be able to see the All right, yes, you should be able to see the first poll on the screen. Would you be able to answer the following question? Has COVID changed your understanding of digital transformation? And you have 4 different options. Yes, definitely, I know what digital transformation means. Yes, my company is now fully embracing digital transformation. Or no, I still work as I did before COVID. Or sorry, what's digital transformation again? Now, going to, and by the way, these polls are anonymous, so we will not shame you. Please do give us your honest opinion. Once you selected it, just push the submit button. That will then allow us to have a real-time view. Oh my goodness, look at that. That already works like a treat. So we have 9 votes, 11 votes. That's great. And it's also good to see that the trend is really starting to go down look, my company fully is embracing digital transformation. That is unsurprising, considering the situation that we are in. Hopefully, towards the end of the COVID pandemic, over the next 6 to 12 months, we hope to have some kind of normality back. So thank you very much. By the way, these polls can also be viewed in your chat box, and the results can be seen there as well. You may be interested in that too. So I've done that, and then I can push my done button, and then I'm back. Well, it's interesting to see that in particular in regards to the digital transformation and how we actually start to manage digital transformation in our environment, and that's really where Agile comes into the talk, as well as actually scaled Agile, and I'll talk about that some more. I thought I'll show you an interesting stat that I got the other day of where will B2B tech buyers increase and decrease spending in 2021, and funnily enough, clearly web and video conferencing, because of that digital transformation, this has really become the new normal. We see this in our environment. And of course, the second one is online collaboration and project management. And really, the project management world has changed over the last, I would say, 15 to 18 months, and really morphs from a project portfolio management capability into a strategic project project management capability, an adaptive strategic portfolio management capability, and adaptive project management and reporting capability. Now, the reason why I say that and the reason why adaptive project management is so important is because we all know that we have different delivery methods when we deliver value to an organization. And funnily enough, Forbes outlined that really in a very interesting article that I encourage you to read. And really, it talks about the past of project management was measured in terms of the ability to deliver on time and budget. But these days, what differentiates project management today is the ability to innovate within the project. And this is really where intrinsically the terminology of agile comes into place. However, before I go deeper into the agile capability, I do want to talk some more about that digital transformation. And it was an absolute buzzword prior to COVID-1. Nowadays, we do know what digital transformation is. However, utilizing that, then I'd like to reference a good friend of mine in the industry where I have some of those slide decks. His name is Peter Kestelholz. He is a Danish, very, very well-known subject matter expert. And he also always asks, if digital transformation is the answer, well, then really ultimately, what's the question? What do we want to accomplish? Well, these are the questions that we want to outline when we talk about digital transformation. It's not just a puzzle piece, but really a bigger picture towards efficiency, towards adopting change in the industry, and not just in our industry, but in the world. COVID, again, was one of those prime examples. And then, of course, from an organizational perspective, we want to make sure that our customers are satisfied as well as that we want to retain or gain that market leader position. So when you think about digital transformation, think about the ability for us to adopt quickly into an environment where administration and administrative overheads are starting to become automated. Ultimately, that will make us more efficient. Now, going through that digital transformation, how do I know that we are actually generally ready to embrace those kinds of new ways of working, the digital way of working? Well, really, we're talking here in a digital DNA space. I'm sure, and you will find that with the polls that we run here in a second. It is not just implementing a new piece of technology or a new methodology. A lot of these big consulting organizations, from EY to Deloitte, are actually recognizing that, and they really talk about a new culture of digital transformation, where we need to consider the type of work that we do, and is that type of work actually prone to be agile? I always take the example of building a house. We may not want to do that in a very agile space, not that we build 10 stories and then on story 7 we want to have another 3 windows in there, which then of course subsequently means that the other stories cannot hold on top of that house. So really, what type of work do we actually have in our organization, and also what kind of workers do we have in our organization? Me being I call it a silver fox, even though I don't have hair. When I let it grow, then it is silver, well, or gray, my kids tell me. I have probably a different view than, for example, the millennials, my children, that have grown up with the digital revolution, where their social network these days is really predominantly digital and not so much face-to-face as we have done that. And of course, does our workplace allow us to be digital ready? Do I have the ability to work from home, which a lot of us, of course, have done that in the last 6 months? Do I need to be customer facing? Do I need to be in the office? Do I have a cubicle? So that workplace is very important to determine whether we want to incorporate that digital DNA. And then last but not least, it really is about the enabler that allows us to consume work and consume meeting and socialization information through different platforms. In our work world, of course, everything has gone down the cloud or gone up the cloud, and it allows us really to have information and work available, no matter whether this is a phone or whether this is a laptop. We have that information readily available. So if you think about the readiness of digital transformation, think about those pillars of information so that you literally can introduce a new culture within your organization. Interestingly enough, there was a survey done. This is already a little bit older. It was actually prior to COVID. I'm sure this has now dramatically changed. However, that do compare the digital versus the traditional world, meaning paperwork, double handling of information, etc. And they had lots and lots of respondents. And I just thought I'll go through some of those respondents. You know, really the question was, what is the biggest difference between working in a digital environment versus a traditional environment? Well, first of all, again, the pace of the business, the speed and the rate of change. And that's really what we ultimately want to achieve through agility, ensuring that the combination of digitalization and agility working gives us that greater pace and flexibility. Of course, a cultural mindset, much more creative learning, risk-taking and collaboration has been introduced because we are not burdened by the administration and double handling of information. 18% said flexible distribution, distributed working place. Again, we talked about that right now. A lot of us still working from home. I know our office in Melbourne has now finally sprung to life again. So everybody in the Melbourne office, hello. Good to have you back in the office. And of course, 16% have said that productivity increases through automation and digitalization. Again, all of these mundane pieces of work that we needed to do that may have somehow entered the black ether, and we don't really know where these approval processes are. For example, in the project management world, that productivity has increased quite dramatically. And of course, 13% said, well, improved access to and use of tools is super important in order to move into that digital world, which also makes a lot of sense. Connectivity, remote working, always on. You can be working on the weekend and therefore have a Monday, Tuesday off if that is possible. So really that makes a lot of sense. And only 1%, well, there are always the naysayers says, look, that did not make any difference to us. Last but not least, I wanted to outline this, comes from McKinsey really, where they say, well, traditional organizations really have a, well, they call it from organizations as machines into organizations as an organism where we literally build teams around a particular requirement or a particular objective or a particular deliverable to ultimately accomplish our strategic goals. And that is really that focus on action. Accountability really lies not with an individual, but within the teams. And therefore, of course, leadership is super important, ensuring that teams actually have the ability to accomplish those agile capabilities in that digital world. All right. Now, I just wanted to set that scene in regards to digitalization and what that means to us. Thank goodness, I think most of us understand that digitalization is not just here to stay. It will overtake a lot of the work that we do today, and that's quite good because that means we can focus on the more and the higher value capabilities. Now, when I think about that, though, in regards to how we would want to move from that traditional into that digital capability through Agile, I'm sure a lot of you have already started to embrace some of that agility. And based on our experience, I'd like to call it from a waterfall or traditional project management delivery to an Agile delivery. Most organizations, I think, are actually in a world of what I refer to as Agile, waterfall, with some Agile elements. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and what that means from an organizational perspective and how you can actually move from that traditional path down that agile path, all the way to the extreme agile, which in our world is the scaled agile framework. And I'll talk about that a little bit too. Now, before I continue, I've got another poll, and I would love to hear your thoughts on, does your organization work in an agile work in some form? It should come up in a second. It always takes a little bit. There we go. It would be great if you could answer the question, yes, we are fully agile, or yes, we have some departments working in agile, or no, look, we are still working in a very traditional sense, or hey, agile, what's that again? Thank goodness these polls are immediate, so I'm going to submit mine. And I can already see a lot of that is actually resonating also with our experience, where organizations are starting to, well, I'm going to call it tinker into the agile world, which gives us actually quite a lot of challenges, especially when it comes to funding, especially when it comes to deliverables of projects. That is actually an issue that we see in many organizations that like the idea of agile, but really haven't fully embraced that agile way of thinking. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, let's talk about a little bit more about how organizations actually manage that. Well, if you think about work, and really work is anything that we do in our organization, how do organizations generally like to manage and organize work? Of course, every organization has a vision or a purpose and has strategic goals, and these strategic goals are planned well and ultimately need to be executed. We often see that there is a big chasm between the planning and the execution of strategy, and this is where I put in sort of that in between, that strategic portfolio management component. This is very much where we break down the strategic goals into chunkable bits, I'm going to call that, where we determine what kind of work do we actually want to conduct in order for us to achieve our strategy and our vision. And as we can see, there's a whole bunch of different ways. In the past, we had, of course, generally services or business as usual work, as I like to call them, and traditional projects. And then in the last sort of 5 years, agile and of course more and more product management comes into the categorization of work, and organizations then either have what we refer to an EPMO, an enterprise project management office, or several PMOs, or have departments that ultimately need to execute that work that is generally planned in a portfolio or even in a So that's just a high picture. The reason why I outline that is because when I think about strategic goals and when I think about strategic portfolio management, it doesn't matter how you actually ultimately deliver that type of work. You need to ensure that you know what is appropriate for what purpose. Because no matter whether you have waterfall or agile, this is only the execution of work. Ultimately, a business strategy is determined through different portfolios, and these type of portfolios can generally be categorized into fear, fact, and faith. Fear, of course, means, hey, I need to keep my lights on. I need to make sure that I pay my staff. Fact is, hey, I do want to grow my business or want to increase my capability of service, which is fact, the return on investment. And then, of course, also faith, the belief in R&D, in product development, or in the way that I see my business in the future. And this is really how organizations on an executive level quite often, of course, think. Now, if I bring this back to the portfolio world or to the PMO world, you can really ask yourself the question, project portfolios or digital office is really the question, comparing the traditional project management where we have centralized control, where we have a lot of project overhead or overload, detailed project plans, design, centralized annual planning, especially when it comes from a budgeting point of view, a work breakdown structure in detail, and then project-based funding and control, which are then measured against waterfall milestones, I'm going to call them. Required, of course, very much in certain industries, but again, in the digital world, we are starting to move more into that lean, agile approach, and it literally means we are starting to decentralize the decision making, making it more team focused. Demand management means for us to ensure that we know what type of work comes into the business, that we prioritize that to the point where we can provide continuous value, of course, with epics, which form essentially business cases, and then rolling out waves, iterations, or sprints of work that allows us not only to adopt quickly, but to retain and regain feedback from the end user, or feedback from the customer, that allows us then to be adopting to market values quite quickly. As the role of an EPMO, or sometimes, of course, of a department, we need to ensure that both of these kinds of mechanisms can be consolidated in a meaningful manner, and that ultimately is not only the performance of projects, of course, whether they're green, amber, or red, but ultimately whether they accomplish the initial objective, which then, of course, translates ultimately to whether we accomplish our strategic goals. Now, when I think about this in the context of the PMO function in today's world, I think for those of you who work in the PMO, and I would think some of you do, or at least are involved, the question really retains itself: do we require a project management office these days? I think most of you who have worked within a PMO would agree that PMO generally has a negative connotation in the business, because it is perceived to be that controlling factor that holds us back instead of helping us, and that kind of mechanism in an agile world can of course be the bottleneck of everything. So the big question for us, of course, is if we want to go down that agile path, want to provide the ability to have different delivery mechanisms, what does that actually mean? Do we then translate that into a portfolio office, or a program office, or maybe even a product office, or do I actually need to have a PMO going forward? Well, what I do know is, I don't know what the future terminology will be, but what I do know is that the reason for a project management office is most certainly there, because we need to ensure that we translate strategy into execution, and therefore the PMO function ultimately needs to actually move into a strategic office where we have the ability to understand our strategy and translate that into work. Now, funnily enough, oops, sorry, that was a bit too quick. That's because there we go. Funnily enough, in Forbes, 92% of executives that were surveyed by Forbes Insights view project management office as the driving force as they transform their organization using disruptive technology. So really the need for that PMO function, whatever we may want to call it, is there. I went to an organization that changed the name from PMO to VMO, Value Management Office, just to outline what the true purpose of those offices really are. So through that, we then, of course, need to think about how can we actually transition our organization from a traditional project management part into ultimately an agile project management path. And again, the source here is from Peter Kestelholz. Thank you very much, Peter. This is always most insightful. There are different models that organization can go down to. On one hand, we often see what we refer to as a bi-modal portfolio design capability. It means you have separate portfolios for agile and separate portfolios for traditional project. It allows us to overcome the challenge of one size fits all when it comes to budgets and funding in particular. And also, of course, it allows us to focus, depending on what type of work, allows us to focus whether we want to execute traditional or whether we want to execute in an agile sense. However, a buy model often also means that from an executive perspective, the embracing of Agile may not be on the forefront. They still have that annual thinking, belief that a budget needs to be distributed once a year, and that can't change because otherwise the world falls apart. Nowadays, well, if you have that kind of live thinking, then unfortunately it happens that organizations are quite negatively impacted by that. The second one is really the Agile with PMO, where we still have that top-down portfolio management and traditional way, and we then start to incorporate Agile teams that work in an Agile fashion. However, the communication is often a challenge there, because terminology in the Agile sense and outcome focused in the Agile sense may mean something else in comparison to the traditional portfolio management capability. However, we see that portfolios are managed in a traditional sense with an annual budget and a particular outcome, and then underneath it we have those project teams that start to feed the portfolio with the completion of those kinds of deliverables and objectives. And then we have the hybrid, probably the one that we've seen most these days, where portfolios and/or projects combined are agile and traditional projects, where I have one project being traditional, another project being agile, but it still forms into an overarching portfolio. And it's actually quite common. If you think about your departments, I would think those departments that have embraced agile are predominantly departments like marketing, like IT, of course, software development, product development. However, on the other hand, other project departments may not have that. So we mostly see it this way. And again, interestingly enough, it is actually the executive layer who on one hand says, yes, we want to be more agile, but on the other hand, do not embrace that. So really you can see there are different ways of how you can move from a traditional into an agile path, which of course then the last, I would like to call it nirvana, even though a lot of organizations do not need or want to be a pure scaled agile organization where we implement a methodology that's called Scaled Agile Framework, SAFe. For those of you who have never heard that, I encourage you to check that out, where you literally then have your portfolio Kanbans, your organizational epics that can quickly change, and of course are then triggered down. There's a great reference that's on a site called ScaledAgileFramework.com that has a beautiful visualization of the different capabilities of how you as an organization are able to implement scaled agile, either in its purest form or in a hybrid form. Now, I want to point out that Scaled Agile Framework really incorporates lean project management and agile project management in a way that it actually grows up into a portfolio and organizational part. So this is really what ultimate business agility is about. Now, with that, I would like to launch my last poll for the day, because I really would love to hear from you whether you've heard of Scaled Agile Framework or whether you have no idea what that means. It would be great if you could let me know whether yes, Scaled Agile Framework is my second language, or yes, yeah, I know what it is, or I've heard about it, but scaled what is Scaled Agile Framework? I have no idea. If you could vote and let me know what your sorry, I need to select. Yes, of course. Need to select and submit. Let me have a look at those results. Interesting. I see again it resonates with what we see in the market a lot, where people have heard of it but don't really know what that means. And I think it becomes really only clear when you start to implement agile teams. So what Scaled Agile Framework ultimately says is, if you want to be able to scale your agile work and become more agile, start at the team level, form your agile teams, and then grow that over time, either from from an essential to a large, to a portfolio, or to a full save. So it doesn't recommend necessarily to boil the ocean in an organization. That risk is of course way too high. But it really allows you to see the challenges that you have when you start working with agile teams. For example, when I have an agile project and my executive manager asks me, "Hey, by when is this project completed, and what are the main deliverables and milestones?" Well, in the agile world, we can't really talk about that to that sense. We talk about continuous improvement, and we talk about the ability to gain quick feedback, where really duration is the one thing that doesn't move, but potential effort or scope, and of course therefore also cost, can move. So the ability for us to manage that in a meaningful way, so that executive management trusts team that they're overspending, or that they are not going down a tangent when it comes to deliverables of a particular project, is actually the risk that we quite often see. In order for you to really embrace agile from an organizational perspective, your executive managers and your senior managers need to be on board, need to understand that. So that's really just outlining how we think about moving from a traditional into an agile capability. Again, I know this seems to be quite theoretical, but it really outlines the different ways of how organizations are starting to think about scaled agile, and scaling that agile, of course, as well. Look, ultimately, I don't want to say it really doesn't matter. There is something that does matter, and that is justification. Justification always matters. And no matter whether you have a traditional way and need to outline that in a business case so that you know at the start what the end result is going to look like, or whether you do this in an epic sense where you outline the bigger picture and the bigger story of what you want to accomplish, but you're not 100% sure how this end result will 100% look like. However, an epic, of course, is sort of that highest way in the agile world compared to business case, or whether you just have a small project or little initiatives where you just simply have to push in a little proposal. No matter how you justify the work, ultimately it needs to move into a portfolio, and it needs to move into a business value. And you will find that as you prioritize that type of work, the ability for you to act and react in a way that your strategic goals can be fulfilled is quite mind-blowing. So think about it. Justification always matters, no matter whether you go down the agile path or whether you go down the traditional path, which really sort of outlines the last slide deck, bringing me back to that overarching portfolio or strategic portfolio management. You will hear this terminology often in 21 to the point where organizations like can you please thank you. Where organizations like Gartner now move away from the terminology of PPM, project portfolio management, and really move into an area of dividing project portfolio management into strategic portfolio management, meaning, hey, I need to plan the strategic goals and how I want to execute, and adaptive project management, where we allow teams to work the way they want to work, whether this is agile or whether this is waterfall, whether it's a complex schedule requirement or whether it's just a Kanban board. However, ultimately bringing both of these methodologies together on that portfolio level, so that my executive always know, hey, do I need to be fearful? Do I need to determine whether the return on investment is going to happen, or do I invest more into a particular area of R&D because I see that being the future? So with that, I'm going to quickly drink something because my mouth is dry, and I'm going to open up for questions. Now, there are some pre-written questions beforehand. I just wanted to see, are there any questions, or is there anything that doesn't resonate with you in regards to what we've just spoke about? Okay, don't be shy. I'm not. So I'll start with some predetermined question that you sent in. First of all, thank you very much for your questions. The first one: can we use Microsoft Project 2016 for Agile projects, and what would it be? What would be the best approach? Well, so Project actually does have a Kanban board that you can use. So instead of creating your tasks sort of in a waterfall fashion, you do have the ability to now Kanban that in MS Project. However, this is really only one aspect of Agile. You need to think about, in an Agile sense, yes, the tasks, of course, are super important, and how you then structure those tasks and how these tasks are completed is super important. But you need to also determine, hey, do I have my epics straight? Do I have my backlog? And is that backlog prioritized so that I understand what the highest value is? The ultimate goal of Agile is to deliver value early and quickly. And as you then progress in an Agile fashion, the value actually, because it is so high at the start, will dwindle down. We refer to that as a burn down. And of course, these backlog items then need to be structured into so-called sprints. And these sprints absolutely can be managed in MS Project. That being said, there are lots of other very good and amazing Agile tools out there. Adaptive project management, really, that's what we are talking about. If you have a tool like Microsoft Planner, you know what, for marketing organizations, that is perfectly fine. Or even Microsoft Azure boards for software development or technical project deployment. Jira, I'm sure a lot of your organizations have Jira that allow you to manage that in an Agile fashion, where you can not just manage tasks in a schedule or execution tool, but you can then also manage your epics, your features, your backlog, and through that backlog, of course, your sprints. So I hope that kind of answered the question. That being said, if you go onto YouTube, there is actually there and write MS Project Agile in, there are some really good videos that outline sort of the mechanics on how you can utilize that. The next question was, how can you run Agile projects in a framework where annual funding seeks to understand benefits from investments? For example, risk to Agile projects because they cannot demonstrate benefits in the same way as a traditional waterfall project. Well, look, this is a very controversial question, and I would actually argue the point that within an Agile project, you can probably, and that's the purpose of Agile, outline the value much quicker than in a waterfall project, because in a waterfall project there's a lot of pre-planning and designing and documentation going. So I need to draw the picture in a waterfall sense at the start before I start executing. However, I do agree with the funding. I think I've mentioned it earlier. The funding is a big problem there, and that's where executive management needs to understand what you ultimately do in Agile is you don't fund a project, you actually fund a team. And that team is the team that continuously works on either a project or on that improvement of projects. So really that chasm between traditional thinking on the executive level versus Agile implementation only because we like the idea of hearing Agile. Agile really only works if your executive management stands behind that. Cecilia, you had your hands up?
Yes, there is a question that has come through the chatting channel. So Monica Garrity asked, very interested in an example of level detail that is appropriate for strategy themes, goals and business benefits, and how portfolios programs fit into that.
It's a good question, and I hope that I'll find that in a second. I'll give you sort of the breakdown. For me, really, portfolios do nothing else but provide a breakdown. I have a nice slide deck there, Monica. I'll show you this in a second. Let me just get this other question right, then I can change to my other PowerPoint slide deck. You know, how do you handle financial management, forecasting, and budgeting for organizations which are running waterfall and agile projects in parallel? And how can you compare those projects for performance reporting across a mixed portfolio? Look, again, no matter how you execute work, whether this is in a waterfall or in an agile measurement, you do deliver something. In the agile world, you actually deliver quicker because you have the ability to quickly adopt and have small sprints, small bite-size chunks that allow you to demonstrate that value. Now, when it comes to the financial management, the budgeting in particular, again, I am a strong believer in actually funding or budgeting for a team. That team, of course, has so-called epics, and these epics determine the direction and the high-level scope that you want to track. Because you do that on a regular basis, let's say within 2-week sprints, you can actually then determine what kind of value points you have delivered. Value points really translate almost into scope or almost into eliminating challenges in an organization, and of course you can measure that. The only reason why this is currently not measured or not recognized is because often executive management don't see that or don't understand that value point system, and that's where really scaled agile framework gives you a lot of guidance in that space. However, I do understand the mixed portfolio, but again, it doesn't matter. You still have a budget for a team or budget for a project, even in an agile world, and you still have your deliverables through epics and through stories that you need to fulfill. We just utilize that as different terminology, and really instead of making that have a fixed scope or a fixed cost, and therefore the effort and the time will be hard coded after my design phase. We retain that flexibility of being able to move quickly or navigate or direct our project into the right direction, because hey, if you in your design or planning have flaws, then the outcome of a project in a waterfall is actually a much greater risk of failure than in an agile world. Cecilia, you had a question?
Yeah, there's another question that's come up.
I'm just going to open up my other PowerPoint slide deck. What was the other question?
So the question is from Jim Stark, and it says, is there evidence that agile-based organizations adjust the messages and data provided to the stock market in order to manage share price expectations?
Well, you know what? I'm just going to say maybe, because I'm not a subject matter expert in the stock market. I can't really comment on that. I'm terribly sorry. When it comes to the project management world, however, I do have the ability to tell you, and we do this, of course, in our business as well. Agile saves us. It saves us from the disappointment that organizations may face because they asked for something at the start that they didn't really want, and we've implemented it anyway because that's what they asked at the start. By working together in a collaborative environment in the agile world, making sure that you're always in touch with your customer makes a very, very big difference, in my opinion. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. What I can tell you, and that leads me back to Monica, let me just quickly outline. I call it the project management conundrum. It's a slide deck that I've outlined many years ago that really outlines how you a real world environment or how you outline how to manage strategy, or how to plan strategy and then manage the execution of it. So I call it always to where to start. You know, have you ever met a project manager that says, hey, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a project manager? That hardly ever happens. So therefore, you know, we need to often go back to those fundamentals, to the why, the how, and the what's. So ultimately, why do we implement projects? So I'm just going to bring this up from a bottom-up point of view. Again, we want to accomplish these strategic goals. Look, it's like going and wanting to have a house. I want to live in a house. Okay. So what does that mean? So you traditionally then start breaking down those kinds of requirements. Well, in our world, for example, increase market share by 30%, we break down those strategic goals into these strategic portfolios. And you will find in an organization that comes very natural. Depending on the organization, we have a digital portfolio, an IT portfolio, or we have a customer satisfaction portfolio, or we have any type of portfolio that allows us to really chunk down the work that is required in order to accomplish our goal. In my instance, I have a portfolio. Hey, I need to expand it to 5 new locations in order for me to increase my market share by 30%. We hire that portfolio manager, and the first thing that portfolio manager says, okay, I need to expand into 5 new locations. Let me break that down into programs, and these programs of work then allow us to determine, in my instance, well, why don't I just simply acquire a competitor in one of the new locations, which will then allow me to start fulfilling my portfolio. So you hire a program manager, and that program manager ultimately then determines what type of projects you want to execute. And this is really the level where we then think about, is the execution of that project an agile project or a traditional project? So the delivery of that work, in my instance here, integrate systems into the new locations. If I ask my project manager that has that project, hey, why do you do that? None of the project managers was able to tell me to say, well, because I want to accomplish my strategic goal of increasing my market share by 30%. That kind of communication really happens above the ability for you to think about waterfall or agile. That's really key, because then ultimately, of course, you track your tasks. You do this in agile, of course, through sprints. You do this in waterfall through phases. But ultimately, then we need to determine what information I want to consolidate so that I can create a project status report, a program status report, or even a portfolio status report that allows me then ultimately to determine whether my strategic goal is executed. And look, Monica, I'll show you this just quickly on an example. This is a software that we built on Microsoft Office 365 Power Apps, and that gives us the ability actually to determine what kind of portfolio we operate in an organization. Now, these portfolios have programs and they have projects that are actually that are both waterfall or agile. So in my instance, let me just go to my portfolio overview. As an executive, I don't really mind whether this is agile or whether this is waterfall. I need to understand whether the outcome and the deliverable has happened here. So in that instance, I can see all of my portfolios. I can actually see that the distribution of my overarching funding of all of my portfolios is in line. In my instance, it's actually an underspend, which is a big problem for organizations. And then, of course, I have the ability to drill down and have the ability to say, okay, a portfolio, let me have a look at that portfolio status. And this portfolio status then gives me the ability to see all of my programs and all of my sub-projects. Now, some of these sub-projects that you see here are actually agile projects and others are waterfall projects. However, the overarching the overarching portfolio measurement, I'm just going to call it, is consistent between those projects. Hence the reason why I can then say, well, actually, my overarching budget is 2.6 million. My estimated at completion is 1.7. So therefore, actually, at the moment, I'm underspending by $940,000. Now, if you then want to know whether certain projects are in Agile or in waterfall, well, you then have, of course, the ability to drill all the way down into a project status report. In that instance, I can tell you already that this is a waterfall project because it talks about the concept of milestones, whereby an Agile project talks about the concept of epics, of stories, of value points instead of milestones. So there will definitely be items that you cannot compare one-to-one because they just have a different mechanism. But there will be these measurements that are overarchingly always the same, whether this is the amount of time that has been spent, the amount of values that I have produced, the amount of money or budgets that I've spent on that particular project. So you do have the ability to do that. And look, just so that you see that I'm not lying to you, I go now into my project list, and you will find I have now projects here, active projects. Some of them are just major projects, which are literally projects in a waterfall stage. And of course, I also have agile projects. It doesn't matter how I manage those kinds of projects on a higher level, because I have that consistent value that I provide, no matter whether this is waterfall or waterfall or agile. I hope that sort of answered your question, Monica. Are there any other questions? Well, if not,
No.
If not, then I would like to thank you very much. This was the last session of 2020, which I'm not happy about. I would have liked to do another one, but you know, it's so close for Christmas. Please come back in 2021. We will very much focus on messaging of the new ways of working, which is strategic portfolio management and adaptive project management. If you are interested in adaptive project management, which I'm sure will be one of the first sessions of Ask the Expert early next year, I encourage you. There is a Gardner report that you can download that outlines the adaptive project management capability and really how the industry of project portfolio management is shifting into strategic portfolio management and adaptive project management. Very, very interesting read. If you don't want to read it, please visit us next year at our Ask the Expert session. I hope that was an hour worth your while, and I would like to thank you very much. Cecilia, back over to you.
Yep, thank you very much, Mark. Thank you to all who joined us today. I look forward to seeing you next year. And yeah, be sure to follow us on LinkedIn, because we post any updates, any new webinars coming up on LinkedIn, and also the recordings. So
one more thing, Cecilia, sorry.
Yeah.
Paul Opong, one of our senseis, has a beautiful blog post that talks about waterfall and agile project management. This was just, I think, released in the last day or two. I strongly encourage you to come to our site and go onto that blog post, or go onto LinkedIn site and check out Paul's post there. That is also very interesting on how you can have, well, mini agile, I think you called it, Paul, right?
Absolutely. Thank you. If you missed any of the previous sessions as well, we got all the recordings on our website, so we'll send that out in the link when we send out this recording as well. Just as another note, our customer care team as well, for those that are part of that, will be available throughout the holiday period. So you can contact us anytime between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. AEDT or business days, and we'll send out another notification about that too. So yeah, thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you next year.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot. Happy New Year.
Happy holidays and Happy New Year.